Hello.
Hello.
That's starting well. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome back, guys, to Dive in Wonder. Number one, how do you feel?
I'm very excited.
Yeah? Are you not
I
nervous?
am very excited. I'm reframing the nervousness as
Right.
excitement.
We're starting well.
And I'm also like marginally stressed.
Okay.
Because this is, I film a lot of podcasts.
Yeah.
This is the first time I'm filming and also in it. So my
Double
brain
pressure,
my brain
because you're
is
also
just, like,
dealing with the
pinging
setup.
things. Yeah.
Nice.
Which is lovely.
Sick.
Yeah.
I'm stressed, but mostly about the drink we have here. Because you think she has coffee or tea or even alcohol.
Pure vodka.
Yeah. What is it? Can you tell us what
It's just fairly lukewarm water is what it is. Is that how you would describe it?
Lukewarm water. That's exactly what's yeah. So yeah, that's a good way to start. All new things.
All new things.
I
new
guess you're paying it
experiences.
back for making you stressed about this. So quality looks great. So thank you so much for setting that up.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Would you like to introduce
I
yourself?
keep looking down the barrel of the camera, which
Okay.
I really shouldn't
That's
be
good.
doing
You should
because
be
I
an
know
actor.
better. I know better.
You should be an actor.
Yeah, I should be. I get that. a
Hello,
lot,
guys.
actually.
Let's do the dramatic. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Welcome to Dive in Wonder. Are you a diver?
I am a diver.
Sick.
Yeah, metaphorically,
Okay.
not physically, because I'm Asian. So
Okay.
whenever I go near a body of water, people get a bit nervous. They're like, he's going to die for sure.
Okay. But
It's like when
people
I go
get
to-
nervous. You don't get
no,
nervous.
I don't. I'm fine.
Okay.
Because I have a sense of confidence in my own competence. But like when I go to icebergs, the moment I approach the water, the lifeguards start moving towards my end because they're like, this guy's going to die for sure.
Yeah.
And then once I dive in, I do a couple strokes. They're like, okay, we can go back to having lunch now. Like, it's
Wouldn't that make you more excited to just make people nervous and just be, ha! Or just like act like you're
Oh, just
struggling and then just,
feign
yeah.
pretend to die.
I would use it.
I guess there's enough Asians doing that on Bondi Rescue, so I don't want to be a stereotype.
Okay, cool. You want to be different.
Yeah, I want to be unique. I want to feel like I'm...
Sick. I think that's a good way to start your introduction.
Yeah, thanks.
So
With,
how
a
are you a
couple of
unique
jokes.
Asian? Describe
How am I?
yourself.
Describe
How would you
what-
introduce yourself?
How
Someone who
would I
doesn't know you
introduce
at all.
myself? I'm Wes.
Yeah.
I am a student of humans.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Sick.
Yeah.
Okay. He's a student of humans. Okay, that's a great start. So you're a student of humans, and that has gone from psychology to fashion. Do you feel like you study humans through fashion as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's really united. That's one of the things that has really united everything I do. It's that no matter what industry I happen to be in, no matter where I'm working, I just love studying people and just being like, oh, that's really like, you're really unique. Like, what makes this person unique? What makes this person different to other people? What can I learn from these people if it's what to do and also in some cases what not to do,
Did you feel like that start from a lack of, did you feel at some point like you were not understanding behaviors around you or something? Because I feel like I've seen this common thread between people that are getting into either psychology or any of this kind of like research that comes from like some sort of like childhood where they were being like, maybe not understanding what they were reading or what was coming from parents and stuff and being like, I need to understand psychology because I'm not sure what you guys are up to, or people in school or something.
That's really interesting. I've actually come to the realization, literally probably in the last 6 to 12 months of therapy, that it was actually because I felt really misunderstood.
Yeah, okay.
In that, I'm trying to...
By whom?
By just the people around me when I was younger. In terms of trying to... I had a very different temperament to a lot of the people that I grew up around in my family and friends. And so I spent a lot of time trying to understand them. And also I spent a lot of time trying to understand myself and why I kind of had this feeling that I didn't quite fit in a lot of ways.
And do you
Yeah.
think that was like culturally, or was it more like also personality wise you felt like you were just different?
I think more so personality wise, yeah.
Do you feel like, did you lean into that difference or did you try to fit in? Or were you like, oh, I'm different?
No,
I'm just gonna
I just
push it.
embraced being different.
Okay.
And I think that's been one of the things that I've really appreciated about myself as well, that I didn't feel a tremendous need to fit in. I was just very much like, I guess I just see things differently, and I just prioritize things differently to a lot of other people. So,
Yeah. But did you never feel like did you ever push that to a point where you were like consciously and kind of like actually acting different and trying to be different because it became your identity? Because I feel like I've seen that as well. I can see that in myself, but I've seen it in people as well. When then there's things where I'm like, was I doing that because that was actually authentic, or because I was like, definitely I'm not fitting in, like I accepted that I'm different, so now I'm gonna be really different,
like
and kind of
deliberately contrarian.
in the sense of like, you know how like we play with identities. We've spoken about this, but in terms of like, once you adopted the identity of I'm the different one, I feel like a lot of people tend to push that. Up until then, when we're older, we find a middle ground when we're actually more authentic. Did you feel like you were always authentic in that search?
That's a really interesting question. I hadn't really thought about that before. I think I've been pretty... No, I think you're right. I think you're right. I think I definitely... Now, looking back on it, I definitely did try and fit in different ways, for sure.
Yeah.
I think I tried a lot of... This is very interesting. I think I tried a lot of different identities on.
Yeah, as we do.
Yeah.
Right?
And I definitely thought I had to be different for different groups of people.
Okay, and you were kind of like chameleoning yourself.
Yeah, I think so. Until I reached the point where I was like revolving in as many circles as I did, where I was like, this is exhausting.
So what was your first approach to anything regarding like psychology, or trying to like, what was the first person that you saw with that curiosity around you, or where you were like...
It was always driven by the disconnect between what people say and then what people did.
Okay.
I remember being quite young and noticing that, and being like, people say one thing, but then when it actually push comes to shove, they do something different. And so I was like, why is that? Like, why are humans not entirely coherent?
Okay.
In that kind of way? And then when I was 8 years old, I had two best friends, Isaac and Jessica. They had a fight.
Yeah.
We're in year 3.
Isaac and Jessica. Yeah.
Shout out. They were having a fight, and they didn't
What's
talk
your
to each
10?
other.
How
for
old
like
are
a
you?
week. I was like 8 years old. I was in year 3, yeah.
Oh, year 3, okay.
And they were having a fight. They didn't talk to each other for a week, and that really stressed me out because I was like, these are my two best friends. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah. Did they make you choose?
I don't remember being forced to choose, but I remember it was like Friday lunch, and they hadn't spoken at school all week, and I was like, I'm done with this. So I literally grabbed the two of them by the hand, and I still remember exactly where it was. I sat them down on the stairs. Like, we had these like demountable classrooms, and I sat them down on the stairs, and I was like, we're not leaving until we talk this out. And we did. We talked it through. They both sat,
Wow.
and I stood. I remember distinctly like standing there watching the two of them, and they talked it out, and then they hugged, and we were all good. And I distinctly remember having the thought, man, that was great.
Yeah.
And if I could do that for the rest of my life, I'm going to be really happy.
Yeah, just like assuming the mediator role.
Yeah.
Which I think, it just came as a need.
And that, I was like, if I can do this for the rest of my life.
That's wild. It's wild that you say that story because it shows such a level of maturity where like at that age, I hope it was, no, it was not younger, to be honest. It was at that age. My first ever like school report, like not report, but basically you had like a book where all the bad things you did would get lodged.
Oh yeah.
And then it would stop you from getting into good unis.
Oh my gosh. It starts that young?
Colombia. It starts then.
Wow.
But what they don't tell you, if you're 8 years old, you can still do shit. They will not pass this on, but it's on the same book. But it's only what's in high school that will go. So, anyways, at that point...
Wow, it's like a record of all your sins.
It's a record of your sins, but
That's
I was the biggest... My whole thing was white. Because I was like a nerd and...
Such a good girl.
I was just such a good girl up until when I was 8. And the first one that got registered was I made someone sign a contract that they wouldn't talk to the girl that I was fighting with. So I made this whole contract, and all the
You
girls
wrote
in
a
classroom.
contract, wow.
I wrote a contract, and I got all the girls in classroom that would potentially talk to this girl to not talk to her. Wow. And then if they wanted to be my friend, because I was fighting with this girl.
Yeah.
She went back to class after that break. No one was speaking to her, which is really horrible at that age. But anyways, no one was speaking to her, like literally as an 8-year-old would do, being like, sorry, I can't talk to you, which made her like realize that something was up. And then she went to the teacher, and then one of the girls ratted me out. And then they made me bring the contract to the teacher's room. Mm-hmm. And everyone read it, and then they called my mom, and they made a massive thing out of it, because it was like exclusion, but I was actually kind of like orchestrating a group.
Wow.
So yeah,
really...
shows such a different level of maturity. That didn't happen again, and I learned my lesson.
That's amazing. So
no, it's really traumatizing. But
us
again,
and them mentality began young for you.
The what?
You've been creating tribes since a very young age.
I've been creating a community.
Yeah, she's been creating a community.
And I hope you're not listening to this. It was Diana. She was a bitch. Okay. She was better when we were in high school, but she was really, really mean.
Did she learn from this experience, or not? It just traumatized her more?
She learned not to annoy me, because she learned I had evil in me that I hadn't showed anyone.
Yeah, I mean, like, to be 8 years old and convince a whole bunch of people to ostracize someone, that's pretty swift. Like, your social skills.
You should just use them differently.
Use them differently. But, wow.
And I remember it came from, like, a really big bullying experience. That's what I'm going to say. So she did something, but I was like, I can actually fuck you up.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to, but she did stuff. But it's interesting at that age to have that mediator role, because I heard Jay Shetty say the same thing about how he started getting into like, because he had to do that, but for his parents, you know, like that thing of like at home, like all these people are stressed, and somehow I seem to be able to like open up conversations.
Yeah.
Which is such a beautiful energy that you're able to provide a space where people can. I think what people that have that do, and then I would like you to tell me how you go into like that as a psychologist, but I think that it's also like an energetic thing where people kind of like get others to put their guards down. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's like, it's also something that you can learn, I think. But I was speaking about it with a colleague the other day, because she was having issues with her flatmate, and it was the type of thing where it's the moment you come to someone who's kind of giving you a bit passive-aggressive vibes, or is trying to like, you can see something's happened, they're trying to send you messages. The moment you approach that like in a massive like naive energy, like, oh, I kind of saw that you were been doing this and it's something up, and you actually act really dumb, but like just naive, just like all the weird thing you're passing, I'm not gonna answer like that. I'm just, people get disarmed instantly. Yeah. And I think maybe that's probably like an energy that you have as a kid to be able to do that, no?
Yeah, I think curiosity plays a big role in that.
And like, why are you angry type of thing?
Yeah. And also it's a willingness, it's curiosity on my hand also, it's the willingness to render explicit what a lot of people want to keep implicit. Right? So it's like someone can be acting
to
really
make it awkward, to be okay,
someone's
to be uncomfortable.
really being passively aggressive to you, and I'm going to be like, hey, like something just seems up right now, right? What's with that? And then they're like, well, I can't actually say what I
like. You're not supposed to say it out loud.
Then I look petty, right? And so it's like kind of like appealing in a weird way. It's like kind of appealing to their self-interest to change the way that they behave.
Yeah. Okay. But I feel like there needs to be a certain level of confidence when it comes to, especially at that age, because when I'm thinking like later on in life, it's so much easier now, because you kind of know that if you're approaching if you're having that situation now where two of your friends are in an issue, and you're providing that curiosity of like, let's try to see where both of you are coming from so that we try to mediate this, that still comes from some sort of like confidence in your role in those friendships, to know that you're not gonna get like pushed out, or like which I think is harder as a kid. That's what I'm telling you. Right now, I know my friends. If they know me and if we share values, they're not gonna think anything negative about me for bringing uncomfortableness up. But I think
They
that
know your intention.
yeah, and they know if I'm making things awkward, it's because I think we're gonna get better from it. It's like in relationships and anything. When you bring awkward conversations up, you usually care. You know?
Yeah.
But I think as a kid, when you're trying to fit in and have like, did you have a lot of friends? Did you feel like chill?
Yeah, I felt like I had a lot of friends across different groups. I also grew up in a very small school. So
Okay.
it's like we had like 30 people in our grade, and it's
Where
like
was
we
that?
literally all knew each other. Here in Sydney.
Okay.
Yeah. I had a funny moment though, a couple of years ago. I was in New York and I went for something called investigative psychotherapy. This is like
Okay.
full psychotherapy nerd shit.
Okay.
So basically,
Is it like a conference?
no, it was with this Jewish psychoanalyst.
Okay.
But obviously when you go to psychotherapy, usually you have to do a series of sessions and they get to know you. And it's kind of like, you know, you go to psychotherapy because there's some kind of focal issue going on that you want to resolve, right? Something kind of like brings
Oh, you were going
to
as a
therapy.
patient.
Yeah, I was going
Okay.
as the client to this guy who I was told was like an absolute guru of psychotherapy. Not around anything. It was literally like, I was like, hi, please poke inside my brain.
Yeah.
Revealed to me things about myself, oh wise one. And so we started with the story of like of me being 8 years old, and usually when I tell that story everyone's like, oh my gosh, wow, like you were such a
That's why it was the opening of
what
the
an
podcast.
amazing
It's like,
human
who are you?
like what an amazing you're just basically like, you know,
Yeah.
Gandhi and Jesus together.
Yeah, but
in
that's
one,
basically how
as
I
a
wanted to start the
magnanimous-
podcast.
Magnanimous human.
I'm actually gonna
and
cut
that's
this as the
usually
intro.
the response I get. And he looked at me and said, really interesting story. So how long do you think you've been deeply uncomfortable when faced with conflict?
Yeah.
And I was like, sorry, that's not
Did
the
you act
conclusion. Were you even listening? Why am I here? Right.
That was not
And
the
he was
reaction
like-
I was
he
going
like,
for.
That's really interesting that, you know, you were like unable to sit with the conflict. Like, has that been an ongoing theme in your life? And what do you think, where do you think you've ended up because of it? And I was like, wow, you know what I mean? Like, that was so interesting because I was like, as humans, we tell ourselves stories, right? We narrate.
We love a story about
Yeah.
ourselves, which can be so good and so detrimental. And what did you answer?
I hadn't thought about
Give
it
me
that way
back my
before.
money.
Yeah, I was like, okay, you know,
not-
I was like, I'm here.
Do you know how long the flight is to come to New York? To hear this shit. Identities.
Yes.
Identities. Okay, just finish that story because I'm really curious. So how did that end up? Like, what did you discover with him?
I think I discovered
About conflict.
that I had to. Yeah, there was this compulsion within me when I encountered conflict that had to be resolved, right? That I couldn't sit with tension and discomfort.
Did you ever use the mechanism of just leaving?
No, it was never a thought to me, particularly like at that age. I think when you're like 8 or 10 or something like that, you can't just, like, your relationships are your relationships, right? Because the only relationships you really have are your family
Yeah.
and the people at school.
So you're like,
it's
I'm gonna
you
make this
literally,
work.
I'm here, like, we're not going anywhere, right? Like, I'm gonna see you 5 days a week, or I live with you. So
Yeah.
I think looking back on that, I was like, no, leaving was never a thought that I had. It was always like, must resolve, must resolve, must resolve.
And do you feel like that has changed? Are you like better at sitting with conflict now, or do you always try to fix it?
No, I think I'm a lot better at sitting with conflict now.
Okay.
Because I don't feel, I think particularly at that age, it's like when there's conflict, you know, it feels like the end of the world a lot of the times.
Yes. And I think it happens. I think the thing is that it's always about the scale of your world at any stage of life, which I think this is one of the things that my mom says the most when it comes to like when she's talking to parents that are trying to deal with their either kids or teenagers. And it's a very common thing to discredit what they're going through because it sounds really tiny when you're an adult. And someone's like, oh, and then she said this in school and now she put this people against me or whatever. And you're like, like it's a very common instinct to go like, no, like it's not that big, you know, like it's fine, like you don't. But for a kid is their whole world, and now they're gonna get to school tomorrow, and these girls not gonna want to talk to them, and it's everything.
Yeah.
So I think it's always about the whole scaling of things.
Yeah.
But then as you grow older, I think it's interesting the sitting with conflict, because I think what I would think the sitting with conflict changes, or like why it changes, I think it's also because you kind of like maybe disconnect your value from it. Like, do you feel like you're like, there can be conflict, that doesn't mean I'm a bad person, or that doesn't mean anything about me, that you're in your own conflict, in your own world?
I think one of my favorite sayings, it's like, you know, I'm fine if you believe that, or I'm fine if you have that perspective. Can we just agree to disagree? It doesn't mean that I don't love you. It doesn't mean I don't care. I just don't see the world the way you see the world. I don't see the situation the way you see the situation.
Yeah.
And if that's something that, you know, it's not like I'm dating and we're trying to decide on a really important, you know, core value of our relationship, but if it's not something that requires compromise on, we can agree to disagree, and that's fine. Like politics, for example, right?
Yeah.
I think we live in an era where people develop echo chambers in their politics because they only surround themselves with people who have the same political opinion as them.
Yeah.
And that we don't know how to, you know, critically agree or disagree with each other anymore without it becoming personal.
But I think that's the whole thing, is that the moment it becomes, and again, it's back to identities, but the moment what you believe becomes an identity. Mm-hmm. And I was speaking about it with one of my friends on the way here, about like religion when it comes to that, because I was telling her that so many days here are like what we were talking about, that so many days are holidays because of Easter. And randomly the subject came and we started speaking about it, and she told me she did the confirmation, which you do at 20 something. I had no idea. We hadn't really talked about that ever. And I was like, why? But like curious, like that's not someone to me that comes across as like she's actually being very like following the Bible. Te amo, Muffy. But it was really interesting because we spoke about it, and as when we were kids and we had really religious people, and like how she saw it now, and she was like, that's my commitment to God that I was renewing. And I think she's kind of using church as a phone, like as the mechanism. She's like, I don't use it because I support what they're promoting, but I use it because like the space it provides for me, it's a beautiful space for me to feel like I can connect to God, but my relationship to God has nothing to do with church. The same way like you use Optus to communicate to your friend, but Optus has nothing to do with your relationship. And I was telling her, I completely get what you say, but for me, last time I was in church, that was like in Christmas, rather than being neutral, for me, I'm like, they're in direct war against what I believe in many ways. And the God I believe in is it almost feels like it's a war against it. So it feels really hard for me to feel neutral, because I feel like I'm in a territory where you're out openly having a whole discourse that goes against so many of the core things I believe now. And but it was the type of thing where it was like interesting, because she's one of my closest friends, and it's the type of thing of like, we were coming back to people. She was speaking about this marriage that she just left, like her friend got married, and the mom made a comment kind of like, she's really lovely, she really loves her, but she was kind of like, I hope you find God. Like, I just really love you. Like, she's going back to LA, but I just hope that you actually find God. And she kind of like kept on having that in her head, like, she was kind of triggered by like, my relationship with God is so personal. Like, why would you think you know anything about it? But then that launched us into the discussion of, but I feel like people that are in that really strong, whether it's political or religious, is kind of like, it feels personal because you've tied your identity to what you believe in. So of course the fact that if we were in that position with her and we had both tied our identity to it, the fact that she's telling me like, no, but church is a place where you can connect, I'm like, well, no, it's the beach. You know what I mean? Because I meditate in the beach. So that's the place where you can connect. And of course it feels personal. And I think that's the thing with like politics, because the moment you acknowledge that you can change your mind at any point, and that is really not, like, it's not you, whatever you believe is not you, and you can don't come here and say you support Trump, but you know what I mean, like, you can come here and be like, this is what I believe today, but my value as Wes in the world, in the big scheme, has nothing to do, you know, like, we have you on the podcast and we're listening to you because I think I can learn a lot from your brain, even though you drink like warm water.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Which is something that you're learning today.
And it shows an open-mindedness that I didn't even thought
like
I had, because I was like, how could I be curious about within the same human that drinks that, you know? So it's the thing, if you tie that to your identity, and it's like the whole point, I think, when you're younger, it's so much harder to know what you are without any of these identities.
Yeah.
So we keep on like latching on.
Yeah.
When it comes to what you just said about conflict, I'm really curious as an actual mediator. So when you're like practicing psychology, how do you approach your patient's conflict in a way of like, how do you approach it first so that they feel like safe enough to share more of it? But then also, like, we're gonna go into like the specificity of what you are doing, because you are dealing with really heavy type of conflict within relationships, and like domestic violence and stuff. But when it comes to like conflict, how do you create a space where that can be kind of like talked about without someone just whining for hours?
It's interesting because in a clinical environment, you have a level of boundary already, in that typically a session is 50 minutes.
Yeah.
So there's a level at which you're not going to have whining for hours because it's a contained environment.
When I mean for hours, I don't mean like time, but I mean in terms of like without a result, or without, you know, how some conversations can be like productive at the end, and some conversations it's just your friend telling you like random annoying things that happened, but you're not really figuring out any solutions or working on why. You're just like whining. But you cannot tell, like, you can tell that to a friend, you're like, you're just being whiny, but I don't think to a patient you're just like, oh my god, you're being so whiny right now.
It's interesting because the psychodynamic tradition that I kind of come from and that I learnt, everything has meaning. So even the things that at first seem, oh, we're going around in circles, or at first seems really disconnected from that, right? Are all kind of telling you something, are all kind of associated with each other for the person that's telling you the story.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example. So it's like, you know, I'm having a fight with my partner, right? And then for some reason I keep bringing up one of the things had to do with a car that we wanted to buy or something. And you're like, but we're talking about a relationship problem, but we're talking about a car. Like, how do these things might seem different. But for the person who's telling the story, they're actually really related. And so everything that you're hearing is giving you a clue as to what's going on underneath, what the real kind of issues are. And so for me, it's all about asking the questions that are going to help me see the world through their perspective, help me understand what this means.
Help me see the world through their... Okay.
To them.
Okay.
Because you and I can have exactly the same experience. We can watch exactly the same thing happen and unfold in front of us. And we're going to take two completely different perspectives of it based on our knowledge, experience, expertise, etc. And so when you kind of approach the therapeutic relationship with the perspective of trying to see the world through their perspective, right? And then you offer that back to them and you reflect their perspective back to them.
Yeah.
And allow them to either say, yes, that's what I mean.
Okay.
Or, no, actually what I mean is this. right?
What do you reflect the facts, or do you reflect like, oh, so you're telling me that you felt like ignored because he didn't pick that card? Like, are you speaking about the feelings, or are you speaking about...
I'm speaking about the feelings and about the experience of the client in that situation.
And is that something that you would also recommend if you're in a situation when you're like dealing with like conflict in life, and you're like, friends are coming over with conflict? Do you do the same in a different way? Like, do you try to reflect back stuff to people in order to... Is that one of your mechanisms in general? Or there's more?
I think so, because it helps me understand, right? So I will say something, say you're, telling me about a situation that you're in, and I'm trying to oh, I don't really relate to that because I'm not an actor, or I'm not whatever you are, right? But then I kind of put myself in your shoes, and I'm like, okay, let me see if I understand what you're saying. If I was going through that experience and someone said that to me about my audition, I would feel made to feel really small in that situation. Is that how you feel?
Yeah, interesting. Right. Okay.
And so the moment you put that out, and then that person can say, yeah, actually, right? That is how I feel. And so they feel heard and listened to, right? And seen in their reality and in their lived experience. Or it affords someone the opportunity to be like, no, actually, that's not how I feel at all. I feel infuriated that like they would even talk to me.
Yeah, and that already is transforming like a whining session into something so useful, because first of all, you're already understanding the person you're talking to so much better. I guess it's interesting as the person who comes to you, just like, and this happened, to have like a mirror, and then kind of like that already gives you a bit of detachment from the thing, because now you're like, oh. Because when you read your like past entries in a diary, and you were like,
who was that?
I was being a bit dramatic. You know what I mean? About a conflict. And you actually just went for it.
Yeah.
And then you kind of like read it, and it does like that, just like a bit of distance from it. You're just kind of like, it feels completely different. You're like, I'm still gonna defend you publicly.
Yeah. But
that was a bit, did we... Could have that been misinterpreted? Maybe.
Yeah.
So I guess the moment you already reflected back in a conversation.
I always talk about experience as kind of like a Rubik's Cube. In terms of a lot of psychological problems that we face are created by the fact that we have an overly concrete view of our experience. Going back to the point we were talking about earlier about stories that we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of psychological issues come about because we have a really linear, concrete perspective on reality. That, no, my view is the only possible view of the situation that's occurred.
Yeah.
And if you disagree with me, this is not going to work, right?
Yeah.
But in truth, I think of experience as kind of like a Rubik's Cube. I want to take it, I want to look at it from different sides, I want to twist it, I want to spin it around, and then like, here, you can twist it and spin it around if you want, right? And then we can kind of come to some kind of semblance of, communal understanding of the reality that's occurred, right?
Okay.
We have to be able to examine that. And so what the therapeutic environment allows us to do is you have your perspective of your experience, and now you're getting a third party kind of perspective on your experience.
Yeah.
Right? And we're both kind of looking at this thing together, being like, what is it really? And what kind of alternative perspectives are there that we can take on the experience that's not minimizing its impact on you, that's not changing the nature of the truth, but allow us to come to alternative kinds of understanding of that.
Yeah. And how do you, from that point, because that's like one of the things that I wanted to pick your brain on when it comes to, I feel like, not to generalize like the female brain or the male brain, but I feel like in general I've heard more of my female friends express like just that wanting to justify attitudes in relationships, for example, like going specifically into that from male. So like, maybe I saw this wrong, maybe so where does that limit come when you're like trying to help a friend, or to kind of like when someone is coming to you and you feel like they rather than going into that, oh, I'm right, they're not standing enough to see the reality in behaviors that are not, like there's a weird empathetic thing that can be the opposite of like, actually, instead of the Rubik's Cube, just like mixing everything. Because like maybe if you saw it differently, I was being dramatic, and maybe this behavior was justified because you had some trauma as a kid. So like within that environment, because like, can you give us like a bit of like just like context on how you have dealt with that? Because one of the subjects that we've spoken a lot about with Wes was the dealing with getting out of abusive relationships and how to support someone who's in one of these situations, in one of these relationships around you, without being invasive, and kind of like that dance between being supportive without getting someone to be scared to like speak to you. So then that's when I was asking you how you were dealing with conflict in someone's like therapy, because how do you go from like balancing someone being open-minded about other perspectives and then being like also stand your ground and boundaries, and also like without them feeling like you're judging them?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thinking about this from the perspective of like friendships, right? Because I don't think all the listeners of this podcast are going to become therapists.
Yeah.
But if you all did, like, amazing. We need so many more therapists in this world.
And it will be because of Wes.
It will be because of me.
Yeah.
Not because I have any identity attachment to that at all.
To that, yeah.
Just to
Okay,
make that
cool,
clear.
cool.
I think the first step really is to come at a situation like this with a tremendous amount of humility. Because I think, particularly when we watch our friends enter or continue in relationships that may be construed as potentially abusive, we want to draw conclusions really quickly, right? We're like, that's a red flag. Like, that's a red flag. They need to leave, right? But often we don't have a lot of information. And so I like to think about these relationships, or I like to think about observing these relationships as a scientist, like having a hypothesis, right? So I think it's really important to listen to your intuition and be like, something doesn't feel right about that. But I'm not going to jump to a conclusion about this straight away. I'm going to collect data, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to listen, I'm going to ask questions, and I'm going to collect data. And so approaching it with humility is really important. The second thing is to then ask questions, right? Be like, hey, I noticed that this happened and I witnessed it the other day. And it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Like, it didn't make me feel good, and it made me, a little bit concerned. Like, is this something that has happened often? Is this something that's happened in the past? Like, is this potentially a pattern in the relationship? What's going on?
Yes. Okay, but then, so that's a great point, because that's exactly what I mean when the fact that it's like it's not always easy to know where the equilibrium is when a friend's sharing conflict with you, because then what I've seen happen very, very often in these circumstances, if someone comes with that question, is the other person, rather than making it the Rubik's Cube, is gonna make it this mash thing about, I'm gonna justify every single thing this person has done. And then they're gonna go like, oh yeah, like, yes, that might have happened. And it happens often, but like, like their mom was really like abusive when they were a kid. And then they had this as a child. And then, so when that comes from like such a point of being, I don't know if you can say overly empathetic, but because I don't even know if that's empathy. It's trying to justify someone's behavior. I don't know how you could call that. How do you make it? Because you're approaching it from like a scientific point of view as you, which is already really good information to just collect data. Because usually it's like a long-term things where you see your friends going through a lot of things. But then how do you get them to also see it in a more scientifical thing, rather than, this is a person I'm in love and I know them so well, so like whatever scientific view you have on this is so different from like,
It reminds me of something one of my therapists told me once when I was kind of like unpacking a relationship problem that I was having at the time. And, you know, I was saying to him something along those lines of being like, you know, this is what happened. But, you know, she's going through a lot at the moment. And like, I know that she's juggling this and her family this and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he kind of giggled and he was like, you know, your empathy is your superpower, but it's also your greatest weakness. He said, just because you understand doesn't mean the action is justified. You can understand exactly why someone does something.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that the action is justifiable, right? And so
But would he use as a therapist the word justifiable?
I think he would, yeah.
Because that's what I feel like as a friend, I would already be passing on judgment if I use the word justifiable, you know? Because I'm already telling you, I feel like whatever you're going, like whatever your partner is doing is not justifiable. And I'm just saying this from the point of view of like, now I've been in the situation of trying to observe my friends, but I knew when I was in that position and I would get any sort of feedback, because you become hypersensitive to feedback and to the way people word things. So whenever I would feel like any of these words would be, I would even feel like I'm going to close myself even more to that feedback. Because like, it already feels like a judgment that you're saying that it's not something that you could justify. And then again, identities. It's not even about this person that I'm defending. It's about your thinking in my head, or that's how I dealt with it. That's why I'm now feeling like walking on eggshells. It's like, it's saying something about me that I'm justifying something you think is unjustifiable. Like it's hurting my ego, you know? It's not even just about, oh, I'm loving, protecting this relationship because it's also about what does this say about me? And I think that's one of the things that is the kind of like biggest thing that I try to speak about now with my friends and share, is that you should not be ashamed to share any of these things with your friends. But that was my number one thing, was I did hide stuff because I don't want you to change this view on me that you have as this like strong woman or whatever I kind of think that you think of me as a friend, and the things that I think you admire me for. And then if I tell you that I've accepted some behaviors and that's gonna affect how I feel like you're gonna see me and my identity. So I guess my whole point of view, sorry, I'm just going, this is really feeling messy, yeah. But I wonder, like, how do you provide as a friend a safe space for someone to understand this has nothing to do on like how I'll see you, or is, you know what I mean? It's not about you being like weak or whatever if you're telling me that you're accepting stuff. How do you provide a safe space so that someone is actually able to speak to you enough so that you have that scientific data collecting approach?
I think the first thing is, and that's a really, really great point, and thanks for sharing that, because I think that's really fundamental to the whole process of the work, right? It's like, how do you, I think a lot of times we're focused in, you know, intervening in situations where people might find themselves in an abusive relationship because we feel discomfort, right?
Yeah.
As in bearing witness to it, it makes us uncomfortable. So I feel like I need to tell you what's going on in your relationship, right? Because I feel bad.
Yeah.
I remember a really good friend of mine, because I was watching a really close friend of mine go through an abusive relationship with a severely controlling and manipulative partner. And I was venting to a friend of mine, and I was like, this is it, man. Like, I'm going to call her, and I need to tell her, like, everything that I think, because, like, I can't, like, you know, I can't put up with this any longer. Like, this is ridiculous.
Sometimes it does feel like that.
She was like, interesting. In a lot that I'm hearing you say, I'm hearing I a lot and not very much about her. So all she said was, really beautifully and really, like, convictingly, she was like, if you're going to do that, if that's the course of action that you think is best, go with it. But make sure you're doing it for her, not for you.
Yeah.
And oh my God, that felt like a slap in the face.
Yeah.
Because I realized I was like, I had so bought into, speaking of identities, right? The perspective of myself is I have to be the savior of
my
this
friends.
person in this situation, right? That I was no longer thinking about what's in their best interest. I was thinking about what's best in my interest, right? Because it was like going back to me not being able to sit with conflict. It was like, I can't put up with seeing this anymore, and so I need to say something. And I need to give you the whole unvarnished truth of my opinion on your relationship. And her point was, if this person, she hadn't met this partner, she was like, if that's who this person is and this is who they are, he's going to do his best to isolate her from all the people in her life who can accurately perceive him and who can see who he truly is.
Yeah.
Do you want to be the person who speaks their mind? Or do you want to be the kind of person who she trusts is still going to be there for her when she finally sees what's actually going on?
Yeah.
And so it was this moment of like, how, and I was like, yeah, like this was, I kind of like took some time out to reflect and think about it. And I was like, no. This is someone who I see in my life. We've gone through a lot together, and she finds herself in this relationship, and I will sit with the tension because I love her and I care about her, and I'm going to be here consistently and just like check in, right, and ride the wave of whatever this is, until she comes out of it. Until she really like comes through and begins to connect the dots for herself.
I think that's like, I think that the fact that you use the word savior, I think what is super important to kind of like remind ourselves about, I think, when it comes to this is that everyone is their own saviors. Our ego, like, we want to do that because it's out of love as well, like out of ego and love, but you want to be that person for someone you want. But I think I heard this beautiful, beautiful quote that I completely forgot who said it. I think it was something like Ram Dass or someone like that. That was just speaking about the fact that we're all here to walk each other home. And I feel like that home ends up being like them. You're just there to walk your friends home to themselves and to their strength to live in a situation like that. But I just feel like it's so interesting to navigate being there with the frustration, because there's really very little things that compare to, like, it's a disgusting feeling to see someone you love going through something like that.
Absolutely.
And to also know when to intervene. Because there are moments, I think, when there's interventions. But I remember, like, I had this conversation with one of my best friends after she had left a relationship where there was behaviors that were she was being stalked. There was just behaviors actual showing up inside your house type of things that she was justifying with, like, this person struggling. And at that point, I think it's the first time that I felt that. I always see her as the most empowered woman ever. So I'm like, you'll be able to deal with whatever. We're getting through this. At that point, when I heard her justify a behavior like that, I was like, and I had this conversation with her and with my mom. I hanged up because she had to go, and I spoke to my mom then. And I was like, I'm actually not knowing if this is a point where I could call the police and I could speak about this person. Yeah. And I can do it myself, however angry she would get at me. Because this was already past the breakup and whatever. But I was like, again, it is a me thing. But I was like, what if something happens to her? As it happens to so many women that justify these behaviors afterwards. Because it's like, we are murdered by our exes on a daily basis when you look at statistics. Or partners. So it's like a whole push and pull, because then you're like, what is my responsibility here? But then that got solved, and it didn't end up in anything terrible. But it doesn't mean it was not, like, that's the whole thing. The fact that something doesn't end up in something terrible, I feel like doesn't means that the behavior is not as corruptive or like as problematic. So then when it comes to that, and when it comes to like providing a space, would you like wait until this person opens up the conversation or like even mentions the word abusive or controlling, or would you, if they're not connecting the dots, be like, oh, I've listened to this podcast on controlling or abusive or like narcissist?
I think we have to acknowledge one thing. It's that, like, what fundamentally happens to people in abusive relationships is their sense of agency is taken away.
Yeah.
And so, which is why coming in with a savior complex is very detrimental for them, because you're still denying them their agency, right? You have an abusive partner, and this is controversial. People are not going to like that I'm saying this, but whatever. I think it's true. People in abusive relationships have a perpetrator who is taking away their agency, systemically taking away their agency, taking away their community, taking away their friendships and their friends, right?
Yeah.
Controlling. When we come into these relationships, also with an idea of how they should live their lives, and say, you need to leave that person, we're actually also contributing to taking away their agency, right?
Yeah, that's so
with
true.
the best of intentions.
Yeah.
But we have to acknowledge that. And so beginning this process of helping them connect the dots starts with acknowledging that, as you said before, we're actually dealing with people, friends, family, who have a lot of defenses against the realization that they're in an abusive relationship, right?
Yeah.
Might be dissociation, might be denial, whatever, justification, whatever. And so the process to me begins with asking questions and being curious. So ask questions about how they're going and what's impacting them. Or if you see an interaction that causes concern for you, you know, just being like, that felt a bit weird to me. Does that happen regularly? And they might say that yes or no, right? Going back to your point earlier about like having reasons and having empathy and understanding behind the actions of the partner or whatever. But I think the more that you ask those questions without judgment, and people can tell, right? Like you were in that relationship. You can tell when someone's asking a question with judgment. And it's when I approach it with openness and curiosity and I'm like, that, you know, that interaction.
Yeah, but it's the same as what you were saying about your example with your friend. There's a point at the beginning when you're like curious. There's a point where you know a lot. You know what I mean? Like a lot, which I guess that's a bit where you were. You're like, I'm going to call and say, because to get to that point, you've been curious for a while.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen this. I'm really curious to know if you've seen a pattern, because you've seen a lot of people in this situation. Do you see a pattern of people thinking, I'm too smart to be in a situationship like that, so I'm not?
Yeah.
Like, is it a common thing? Like, what are patterns that you've seen? Because I think that's one of the defense mechanisms, again, back to ego, that I've seen and I had, which is the type of thing where you just go, I would know if that was what was happening. Like, I'm pretty smart, I'm strong, you know, like I'm in this generation.
One of my friends who we trained together as therapists was in an abusive relationship. And, and was in denial for about so long. She's like, I know better. I know these people. It's just, I have a high need. Like, he's just very needy. And, you know, again, the psychologist understands the background behind the behavior. And so it's like, oh, like, you know, he's just a little bit difficult. But that's because of his parents. And that's because of X. And this is because of Y.
Yeah.
You know, definitely. Yeah. We actively defend. Our brain is amazing at actively defending against things that cause us psychological pain, right? It's amazing at it. And so it works beautifully at that. It's very good at it.
I think this is massively important, coming back to us not being that attached to our identities. And we spoke about that before we started filming, about how our lives would have been so much easier if when we were young we would just be fine to come across as stupid and ask questions that made us seem like we were not experts because we weren't, you know? And I think that's one of the things that even now I feel like has me the safest in different environments, is coming across as I don't know, and I'm not too good to be in like an abusive dynamic. I'm not too superior, like my intellect one. So it's the type of thing where you're actually more curious and open to be like, what is this? Rather than coming with all these stories about my value is tied to my identity as a smart person, or tied to my IQ, or tied to like, therefore questioning whether or not I've let this go on for so long without realizing what it was. It's questioning my worth. Right? Yeah. And I think it's like the whole identity thing about, we have no idea.
I think as well, it's important to realize, you know, going back to your question about what else you can say to people and approaches for, you know, helping people in potentially abusive relationships gain some perspective, right? Along with, you know, some of the examples I gave of like, how do you know, is this something that happens often? Has this happened before? You know, is this a pattern that's, you know, coming to light in some way for you? I would also ask the question, if they keep justifying and they're like, yeah, but it's because of this or it's because of that, I would also very simply ask the question, out of curiosity, if what was happening to you was happening to a friend, what would you say to them?
Yeah, that's a great thing to ask.
Because it really is, that thing where we will justify things that happen to us, but the moment, you know, talking about psychological distance, right? The moment we see that happening to someone else, it's crystal clear what it is.
That's actually great, because you will never be justifying your friend's partner doing some crazy thing in that way, you know? No, that's actually great. And I used that when it came to the whole house and the police situation. When I told her, I didn't finish the story, but I talked to my mom, and then after talking to my mom, I told her, this is my instinct. I don't know what you want me to do about it, because this is something I would do, and I would be willing to get you to be angry at me. I don't care. And then had this discussion. She calmed me down and whatever, but it was the type of thing where I was like, in a selfish way, but not, I was like, just tell me right now what you would do. But I guess I never used that before, of like, how would you feel about it? It was just, tell me right now how it would feel. I just tried to guilt trip her into like, look how, like, one of the humans I love the most in the universe, I feel like it's in danger. Tell me what you would do if it was me. And that did snap something in like.
And I think that's a really good thing to do when you feel like it's reached a tipping point. You know, it's like, I've been curious for a long period of time. I've been open-minded for a long period of time. I'm gathering data. Whoa, we've reached a point where it's like, your safety or the safety of other people is potentially in danger. And so right now, I need to kick into gear.
Yeah.
Right? We've reached the point where action needs to be taken. And often, I think when you do that, when you have this prolonged experience of having trust, it really does ram home in that moment how severe the situation is right now. Because the person's been like, oh, she's been like here, like consistently over time for a while. Whoa, suddenly it's escalating. Okay, maybe I really do need to look at some things, and maybe I really do actually need to reevaluate.
Yeah.
Because you've earned the right.
Yeah. Yeah, true.
You have to earn the right?
You've earned the right and the trust that you don't just overreact for anything, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
It's
that's
not like
really
you've just
true.
met this guy at dinner and you're like, oh my God, red flags. Like, you must break up with him. And they're like, you spent an hour and a half with him. He didn't even talk to you. Like, what are you talking about? You don't know this person.
Yeah.
You've earned the right? That's really important because what you're trying to get, your friends or your family to is a point of what Baumeister, a psychology researcher, and his colleagues call crystallization of discontent.
Yeah.
Crystallization of discontent is, I always have the imagery of like, when like the Transformers assemble into like Optimus Prime, right? And it's like you go boom, and suddenly you have this giant robot. It's kind of like that, but psychologically in our minds. The defense mechanisms, the thing that they serve is to keep all of these memories of negative experiences and negative emotions separate from each other.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, I know that he threatened me, but like it's a one-off, right? Even though he's probably done that every couple of months, every time he drinks. Or no, but that he just overreacted in this one circumstance because like he's under a lot of stress at work. Like that's never happened before. Those justifications. But as people start to connect the dots, these associations gain momentum. And then there comes this moment where it's like, and then all the pieces come together and you go, wait. And reality shifts. And that's the moment where they decide, holy crap, like I see this for what it is and I'm going to leave. Right? That's what you're trying to help people get to. You cannot do that for someone. But by asking questions, by trying to help them, by facilitating them making connections on their own, they're going to get to their point. And when they get to that point, that's when they actually take action.
That's actually amazing advice. Yeah, I remember when you mentioned something like that, and it really helped. Because it's true that I think we don't realize that I don't really understand how that mechanism works in the brain of putting everything separate. But it does happen that you connect things to what was happening that day, or like, everything is just completely different. And it's just as a friend that you're able to see the repetition.
And even, by asking, you might ask the question, has this been a repeated pattern? Has this happened before?
Yeah.
And they might say no, right? But just priming their brain, to your favorite reticular activation system, priming their brain to think about patterns, to think about repetition.
Yeah, because then the next time it happens, they'll be like, they'll have like Wes voices being like, did this happen? And you're like, don't know if it's the same thing because he used a different word and it was not middle of the night, it was middle of the day, but and it's so interesting that you say that you cannot do that for anyone.
You can't do that for them.
They can do it.
You want to, right?
You cannot be anyone's saver at the end of the day.
In your mind, it's like it's a super highway. It's a LA freeway of connectivity. In their mind, it's like a fishing line. But like once you start the fishing line, it gains momentum over time.
And again, it's like, walking people, which is, I think, what people do as parents. I see my mom all the time doing stuff, being like, I know she knew decisions that I was going to make like 6 months ago. But she knows if she tells me, I'm going to be like, you have no idea. Even though you were like, I could have saved 6 months of, but you're like, no, just little inches.
Yeah.
Until people get to the conclusion and they're like, oh my God, I just realized this. And then you can see the smile of people around you like, wow, genius.
Yeah. It's funny, like being a therapist, and it's like, I try not to have too much certainty in what I think people do, because also like life has a great way of humiliating you.
What they do as like what they will do?
Yeah, what they will do. Like I try not to be too confident in my predictions of human behavior, because I also understand the complexity of it. But sometimes you just see patterns and you think to yourself, I'm like, I've had 10 cases of like, A plus B equals C. So I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. And then sometimes, you try and warn them or whatever, and they're like, whatever. And then it happens, and you just kind of sit there and you're like, yeah.
But we love second. I feel like that's a sign of intelligence that some people have, and hopefully you have more the older you get. But it's not easy. It can be done, I think, but it's not easy to learn from someone else's experience. I think a lot of the time you still go and stumble your head against the wall, even though, you know what I mean?
I think that's one of my life goals, is honestly to learn as much from other people's experience as possible.
Yeah, but again, I think it comes with age, because it comes from being humble. And again, is what you were saying. If you were coming in your like practices and like choosing cases that were hard, you would have learned more. But it is that thing about actually, the older you get, the more you're like, if I don't have this like ego trip of thinking I know, then maybe I won't stumble upon the wall you just told me not to go to. Just I feel like the younger you are, the more you're like, but also my like head's really strong. You know what I mean? And you're a bit weak, and so it's good to learn from other people's, because you save yourself so much time, which is why we're doing like what we like consume podcasts, books, what people have done. We're not that unique. We really aren't. And I think it's interesting when it comes to change of careers and stuff that you did, because like you need to have such a strong sense of like your own self-worth, disconnected from what you do, for example, to be able to like pivot career-wise the same ways as to be able to be like, oh, am I in a dynamic that's not? Because we feel fooled. It's so much about our ego when it comes to relationship, you know?
Much. And it's funny because like you just sparked two trains of thought for me. The first was the first time I went to LA, talking about, identities.
Yeah.
I've always done a myriad of different things.
Yeah.
I was studying and doing psychology research and working as a therapist and, working for NGOs and sitting on the board of NGOs, as well as, I was a wedding photographer to pay my way through uni.
Yeah.
Moved into fashion and the digital landscape. So the first time I went to LA, whenever I was in Sydney and like meet people, they'd be like, what do you do? Was my most hated question, right? Because I was like, do you actually want to know or not? Because like this explanation is going to take a while,
in LA?
Right? In Sydney.
Okay.
I was like, this explanation is going to take a while, right?
Yeah.
And then you like start telling people, and
Sit
you
down.
watch people's like just
What do I do?
their
Yeah.
eyes glaze over, right? And I went to LA, and I was like, I remember the first time I ever was in LA, out for dinner by myself, met these people at a bar, and then they were like, oh, what do you do? And I was like, well, okay, so I'm here because, I'm doing a doctorate in psychology and I'm doing research and I'm presenting conferences, but I'm also a photographer and I also sit on the board of NGOs and blah, blah, blah. And they were like, oh, cool. Like I am a TV producer and I'm actually also a makeup artist and I'm also a jiu-jitsu instructor. And
That's
a professional
sick.
dog walker. And I was like,
I'm a professional dog walker. That's me.
Hold on, what? Right? Like, I was like,
Yeah.
I have found my people here. Like, everyone here is doing 8 million things. Like, It was amazing. And so, but then I found myself at a business conference with another friend of mine who's an incredible entrepreneur. And I found myself in the lift with one of these business speaky people who has a podcast and stuff. And he said, so what do you do? And I gave him the list, and he said, too long. We're in an elevator. We're literally in elevators. He's like, elevator pitch. Figure it out. What's the common thread between all of these? And I was like, well...
Figure it out.
I study humans. That's what I do. Across everything I do, what I do is I study humans. That's what I do. And he said, brilliant, right? Because he said, that's the perfect introduction to everything, because the moment you say that, no matter who you're talking to, they kind of just go, how?
How do you study humans through photography?
Because humans have a way that they see themselves, but then there's a way that I see them, right?
Yeah.
And so I try and get people to see them the way I see them. Because when I look at someone, I'm like, we can optimize the situation. You know,
Yeah.
we can light this, we can shoot, what lens am I going to use, what lighting, what scenario, what context can I put this person in that they'll be the most comfortable, that they can give me the best of who they are.
What context can I put this person in that they can, yeah, that's a, yeah.
Right?
And I think even when it comes out of photography, that's a great question to ask yourself, like when studying humans, even like with children.
Yeah.
That curiosity of what context can I put you in where you can thrive.
Yeah. I just spent the long weekend with my best friend's little girl, who's almost 2.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm not a kid person at all.
Yeah, you don't come across like
Thank you. And
no, just because like the type of food you eat, like Wes likes the most like posh, weird. You know, like a very fancy restaurant in Paris would serve you this tiny thing that has like eggs that were brought from a fish that was meditating in the Himalayas. And then the fish was not killed. It was led into elimination to die. So there's no muscle tension in the fish. That's the type of food you eat.
I love it. Yeah, I
which
love
is
food.
Completely incongruent with like a child would hate you.
Yeah. Because I wouldn't be able to eat the food at the optimum temperature. So that would be a problem for me.
Back to the you were with the child.
It's so fascinating because I think if there's one thing I've learned from spending almost 2 years with her, is the fact that she's different every single day. It's like she'll be capable of one thing yesterday, and then the next day it's just different, right? What she likes, what she's into, whatever will change. And so I find myself in this process of constantly learning who this new human is.
Yeah, which is sick.
Right? Which got me thinking. I was like, I wonder how many of my interactions every day with people I'm missing things because I've already put them in the box.
Yeah.
I've figured them out, right? I already know who they are. Which then got me thinking, I wonder how many relationships fail because we do exactly the same things to our partner, right? That like at the moment that I met you, I was attracted to this person with these qualities and I was like, yes, we're going to enter in a committed relationship together, right? And then they've grown and changed, but in my head, they're still the person that they were. Until one day they ask a question or their values have changed or their beliefs have changed. And I go, whoa, like this is not the person I signed up for.
Yeah.
Right? And then you watch relationships fall apart.
Because you were not present as they were changing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting because the colleague I was talking to you about was also, she's been in a relationship for like 10 years and she's like 27. And it's worked. But I feel like I've seen a common thread. I'm not saying this always happens, but the relationships that have lasted this long, because I've seen a lot of people like tell me this, and a lot of the time it's so bad, but I've like, when I hear people say that they've been in relationships a long time, when they're this young, I feel like I became a bit, it's so bad because it's a judgment I pass on that is completely a reflection of me, but I feel some sort of like pity. I'm like, you still don't know yourself. Like part of me is like, and I was like trying to investigate that because I was saying that to my mom and I was like, I see that generalization that I do and I know it's wrong because I don't know what people are going through. They might be the happiest. But I just have this thing of like, you still don't know yourself. Like you haven't gone through that. And it was so interesting because when I've seen people where I feel like they seem really happy and everything, it's people, for example, her, they were both really young. So they actually both entered the relationship in the knowledge of we have no fucking idea who we are. So they explored it together.
Right, yeah.
Rather than when I've seen it not work with my friends and stuff, it's like someone had already what they thought they were settled in their head. And then someone maybe younger that had a transition period, it hits even harder. Because it's like, you're actually a completely different human, which she was telling me, we are completely different human. It's humans. It's just chance that we grew in the same direction. Yeah. And we like the new version of each other. Yeah. But I think that's the whole point. You're like, even in friendships, like I met my best friend, I think it's going to be like 8 years now. we've gone through 70,000 lives, you know. We thought we were like married women before, and then we're writing, and you know, like, but it's the type of thing where I sound so cheesy every time I speak about it, but I feel like I judge every relationship. But like, if I get into a relationship, I want it to be like my relationship with her, just because beautiful. In a sense, no. But I feel like I keep on falling in love. You know what I mean? Yeah. And she's just a completely different version. And like the kid gets into something else, and just goes into something, and it's just like, wow, if I met you today, I would be so obsessed with you. But in a way that, I'm not saying that in a critiquing way, because she was awesome, but like, I'm not more attached to her version of when she was 8 years younger than I am now, you know?
Yeah.
But I think we do that with ourselves as well. Yeah.
I love that. I have that relationship with my best friend as well. I remember we were at a mutual friend's wedding in Greece, and we were just kind of like just sitting at this reception. It was so beautiful. And we were just watching it unfold, and I just looked at her, I was like, I wouldn't be here without you. You know, like, these are friends I made because of you. And who would have thought, like, 10 years ago, us, you know, starting to shoot together for a vlog. And, like, 10 years later, we're here getting to experience the most beautiful thing together. Yeah. You know? It's those moments that are, like, so wonderful when we embrace how people change and flourish.
Or you embrace it, you're with it,
It's like when my version of what you're saying in terms of like, I get really kind of like a little bit judgmental when people say this, is when people tell me like, we're in a relationship, we never fight. Yeah. And I'm like, one of two things is happening here, right? Either one person in this relationship doesn't care enough to fight about the relationship, or one person in this relationship is acquiescing to whatever the other person wants. Right?
Yeah, which is a time bomb.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a whole thing with people pleasing. That's so cute for you.
Yeah, I'm like adorable for you.
But it's the same in friendships, because, and when it comes to being in general, to making things awkward, like we were speaking, we grow from friction. So even in, it doesn't mean fights, like then you need to see what a fight is, right? Because like for some people, fight doesn't need to be, and I have friends who fight, no one raises the voice, and they can still have a conflict, you know, and that's hopefully
that's
the goal.
Incredibly healthy,
But fight as in like, what are the chances that you don't disagree on anything? That's... You're completely, like, you're two different humans with, like, like, upbringing and stuff. Yeah. It's really weird that there's no conflict. And I think even in friendships, like, what we can do, and I don't know if people do in these in relationships, because I don't think I've experienced that. I'm not that patient. But, like, what people do in friendships is that they avoid the subjects of friction. Like White Lotus. Did you see White Lotus? Do you remember them not wanting to talk about the whole political, they did get really freaked out when they realized that she was, like, into what she was, but then they were like, well, might as well not talk about this at all. Let's just not talk about it and keep the friendship. Whereas I've found that in friendships, whenever I've leaned into it, like today with Mafe, I would have never, because she's too close for me to, like, I would never be like, oh, let's just not talk about the fact that you got confirmed. But of course I was like, this completely derailed our conversation. We were talking about this like whole relationship-y thing and whatever. But I was like, no. You got what? You got confirmed? Yeah. Just because in my head she's not the type of person who would do that, because she's super open-minded. And evidently I'm not, because I'm generalizing that everyone who gets confirmed is not open-minded. But the moment she said it, it was just pure curiosity, because I'm like, I 1,000% know that this doesn't mean anything about you that I don't, that is not negative. I'm just really curious, because I love your brain. So how do you justify
this. Yeah, it's like,
how did your brain that I adore justify getting confirmed? But and it's the most, like, all the growth comes from that in friendships, I think. In relationships, I feel like it's harder, because I feel that we're scared that disagreement will mean you might love me less. You know what I mean?
Or you might not want to be with me, right?
Yeah.
It's like, if you're growing and changing too much, does that mean I'm no longer in this new version?
And if you were attracted to like psychology and now you're attracted to photography and whatever, why would you keep on being attracted to the same traits in a partner? So it's like and then we start avoiding those discussions of differences, which I think is like, it's always the leaning into awkwardness and uncomfortable conversations that I feel like in every aspect of life is the best, but our brains hate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the best because, going back to what therapy is like, every therapist or psychologist has a fantasy of perfect attunement and understanding of a patient.
Okay.
Right? Going back to the discussion about mirroring. But that's not where the work of therapy is actually done. The work of therapy is actually done in an environment of rupture and repair. It's when I misunderstand what you're saying, right? And you feel empowered to actually correct me.
Yeah.
When there's a breakdown in a relationship and then a repair, that's what grows trust. Because this person might have come from an environment, a familial environment, a parenting environment where conflict meant they weren't worthy of love, where conflict meant they would be punished, where conflict meant, all these different things that
when it's
means to us as humans.
transactional, like affection is transactional.
Being the transformative work of therapy is found in the fact that this person discovers for potentially the first time in their lives that there is a relationship where they can bring misunderstanding to the table, where they can be open about the things that they've previously hid to ensure ongoing harmony, right?
Yeah.
That's the work of therapy. And
to ensure, not like, and still ensure, but to. That's such a great way of saying it, actually. Because you're not doing it and you're still able to keep harmony. You're doing it for that reason.
And so that has, understanding that and having a lived experience of that has transformed my life, because then I'm not avoiding conflict in my relationships, because I know that if we can move forward and if we can rupture and then repair, we can have a disagreement and then repair, like, that's a wonderful thing. And we know that we're going to be in each other's lives for a prolonged period of time because we can rupture and repair. And every time it's like, when you break an arm and then the bone grows back, but it grows back stronger than it was before, right? Because now it's even more strengthened.
Yeah.
That's what it's like in relationships. But the problem is that most of us haven't been taught that, because that's not what was modeled to us. And so, those are the relationships that I cherish the most, like the ones where I know I've really messed up sometimes, and I've done some things that I'm not proud of, but hey, you've been there for me, and you proved that, like, there probably were consequences to what I did, but you proved that you were still there, that you're willing to stick it out with me through that. And so I'm going to fight to the wall for you, for exactly that same reason back. And that's where the depth
and the trust is so much deeper than if everything was like peachy and pink and perfect, because then you don't know if at the first sign of disagreement everything would blow up. And I think that's like a beautiful like thing that's in my experience when you compare it to like the bone and stuff. I think that's exactly the same thing that happens with your relationship to yourself. When like you've like ruptured and repaired so many times, you're so much more confident in doing random shit, and just throwing yourself on a limb and then trying new stuff, because you're like, I got you. Yeah. Because we fucked up really badly and I still had you then. Yeah. But that's why then it's so important to know how you react to those moments where you feel like you fell, because it can go the opposite way, where if you abuse yourself and you don't have that like confidence, if you don't have that like repairing with yourself, if you're just like, oh well, you did that and you were stupid and that was dumb and why did you do that, then that will also play into how you will feel confident about fucking up again, or just keep on going, which is the same. If you open up with a friend and someone abuses you and stuff, then you're just like, okay, this is not the type of relationship where I feel safe. So
Yeah,
the rupture and repair thing is a great image to have.
Yeah, I always have this mantra that I tell myself. It's like, I have within me everything I need to overcome the situation, And it's funny because to me, that's like really fundamental to resilience, that like deep belief that no matter what happens in my life, I've overcome some stuff.
Yeah.
And I've been through some shit. And I will be able to face whatever's coming next, Yeah. And it's real. Like, I remember I was at home one day when my mum had a stroke. And I literally found her on the floor, and I called an ambulance. And I distinctly remember that moment as a psychology researcher who was, who understood what I was signing up for and what the recovery process would be like. I remember, like, literally in the ambulance, like they wheeled the gurney into the ambulance. I got in the back of it, and we were on the way to hospital. And I kind of had this almost like out of body experience where I was like looking down on myself in the ambulance. And I was like, I know, looking at myself, that I have within me the capacity to endure and to overcome and to deal with whatever's coming next. And it was this beautiful moment because it was like, do I fall apart? Or do I hold this together, right? And it was really this moment of like, am I going to let myself just be completely overwhelmed by everything going on now and then like spiral myself out of control, which is going to help nobody? Or am I going to recognize, no, in and of this moment, I've got everything I need within me. And it's not external. It's internal. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I think that's a great way for us to wrap this first one, because it might be like 2 hours. But we definitely have to jump into another one. Thank you so much for this.
My pleasure. This has been so fun.
Yeah, no, thank you. Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I think that's great. We've been everything, everywhere.
We've covered
all at once.
All at once. Sick.
Yeah.
It's left a lot of food for thought, I feel. Yeah. And I think that, it's so beautiful to have I feel like you have a really great way of both separating yourself from things enough to have an outlook that seems scientific without that making you feel less empathetic, which I think is something that's really helpful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
With me still feeling like he's still human. Because I feel like robotic. A lot of the time, a lot of the time people that are able to give you that perspective, I'm like, but do you have feelings?
Are you a robot?
Do you ever get triggered?
Did they replace the bit?
Yeah. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
See you on the next one, guys.